The Johnson family was filled with hope as they arrived in their new neighborhood. Michael, a skilled carpenter, had built their new home with his own hands, each beam and board reflecting years of hard work and dreams. Clara, a talented seamstress, envisioned a fresh start for their children, Emily and James, who giggled excitedly as they explored their backyard. The house stood proud on a quiet, tree-lined street in a predominantly white middle-class neighborhood. For the first time, it felt like they had arrived, not just at a new address, but at a new chapter in life. The scent of fresh paint mingled with the aroma of Clara's home-cooked dinner, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. But beneath the facade of tranquility, shadows loomed. Little did they know, their dream home would become the stage for an unfolding nightmare. From the moment the Johnson family arrived, something felt off. The neighbors greeted them with polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. It started small and overly long pause before someone returned. Michael's wave, or the way conversation, seemed to fall silent as they approached. The children felt it first. At school, Emily's bubbly nature was met with cold stares. The classmate who sat beside her quickly moved seats the next day. James, a quiet boy by nature, came home with tears in his eyes. "They called me names, Mom," he whispered. "They said we don't belong here." The neighborhood itself seemed to reject them. The lawn, which Michael had meticulously cared for, began to wither inexplicably. The hardware store ran out of materials Michael needed for his workshop. Even Clara, who usually found solace in sewing, couldn't shake the unease that settled in her chest. One evening, as Michael worked late in his garage, the sound of muffled laughter caught his attention. He stepped outside to find their trash cans tipped over, garbage strewn across the driveway. The laughter faded into the night, but Michael's heart sank. He cleaned up in silence, not wanting to alarm Clara. The next morning, they woke to something worse. "Michael, come here." Clara's voice trembled as she pointed to the side of their pristine white house. In bold red paint, the word "Leave" was scrawled across the wall. The children stared in horror. Emily clutched her teddy bear, and James wrapped his arms around his sister protectively. Michael's jaw tightened as he scrubbed the hateful graffiti, the rough bristles of the brush scraping the paint but doing little to ease the sting of humiliation. The days stretched into weeks, and the hostility grew harder to ignore. Clara tried to integrate into the local sewing circle, but her invitations were met with excuses. Emily was excluded from a classmate's birthday party, something the girl loudly announced as Emily walked by. Then came the mailbox incident. Clara found a letter shoved inside, its message crudely written on a torn piece of paper. "You'll never be one of us. Leave while you can." Clara's hand shook and she read it aloud to Michael. "This isn't just mean-spirited anymore, Michael. It's a warning." Michael tried to reassure her. "We're not going anywhere. This is our home. We have every right to be here." But even as he spoke, he couldn't ignore the pit forming in his stomach. One night, as Michael sat in the living room, the sound of breaking glass shattered the quiet. He ran to the window and found a rock lying on the floor amidst shards of glass. Wrapped around it was another message: "Leave now." He stepped outside, scanning the darkened street. The only sound was the faint hum of crickets, but Michael felt eyes on him. The days ahead felt heavier. Clara began locking every door and window, even during the day. Emily and James grew quieter, their innocence dimmed by the weight of fear. Still, Michael stood firm, determined to protect his family and their home. But as they braced themselves for what might come next, they had no idea just how far their tormentors were willing to go. What would you do if the safety of your family was at stake? Would you fight back or flee? The first rays of dawn cast a muted glow over the Johnsons' front lawn, but the sight that awaited Michael sent a cold chill through him. Overnight, someone had driven spikes into their driveway, slashing the tires of their family car. The acrid smell of rubber lingered in the air as Michael crouched to inspect the damage. He clenched his fists, a mixture of anger and helplessness bubbling inside. "Michael, Clara's voice broke the silence as she joined him outside. Her eyes widened when she saw the ruined tires. "They won't stop, will they?" He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're stronger than this. They want to scare us away, but we're not giving them that satisfaction." But how long could you hold on to hope when fear and hatred were closing in? The vandalism escalated in the days that followed. Their once pristine garden was trampled, with the carefully planted flowers ripped from the soil and scattered like discarded trash. The mailbox, already a source of dread, was ripped from its post and thrown into the street. Inside the house, tension simmered. Emily clung to her teddy bear at night, whispering, "I'm scared, Daddy." James, who had once idolized his father's strength, now watched him with silent, questioning eyes. The breaking point came one morning when Clara opened the front door to find an ominous symbol spray-painted across the porch. Beneath it, a dead rat lay sprawled, its lifeless eyes staring up at her. She screamed, dropping her coffee cup, the porcelain shattering across the hardwood floor. Michael rushed to her side, his heart pounding as he took in the grotesque display. He quickly ushered Clara and the children back inside, his own stomach churning. Michael decided it was time to call the police. Officer Reynolds, a middle-aged man with a clipped mustache, arrived later that day. As he listened to Michael's recounting of the incidents, he scribbled notes onto a small pad. But his detached demeanor set Michael on edge. "We'll look into it," Reynolds said, tucking his notebook away. "But unless we catch someone in the act, there's not much we can do." "Not much you can do?" Michael's voice was strained with frustration. "This is our home. My family is being targeted. Isn't that enough?" Reynolds sighed. "I understand, sir, but these things can be hard to prove. People are territorial. Maybe it'll blow over. Blow over." The words echoed in Michael's mind long after the officer left. He knew better. This wasn't going to blow over. That evening, Clara tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. She cooked dinner, her hands trembling as she chopped vegetables. But when Emily pushed her plate away, mumbling that she wasn't hungry, Clara's resolve cracked. "Michael," she said softly, tears brimming in her eyes, "I can't do this anymore. The kids, they're suffering. We need to leave." Michael took her hands in his voice steady but strained. "If we leave now, they win. Everything we've worked for, everything we've dreamed of, will be for nothing." "But at what cost?" Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. As night fell, the family huddled in the living room, too afraid to sleep. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, but every creak of the house felt like a threat. Michael sat by the window, keeping watch, his tired eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The next morning brought another blow. Clara's sewing shop, her pride and joy, had been defaced. The windows were shattered, and hateful slurs were painted across the walls. When she arrived, her knees buckled at the sight. The shop had been her refuge, her contribution to their future. Now it was a stark reminder of the hatred they faced. Michael held her as she wept, his own heart breaking. "We'll fix this," he promised, though the words felt hollow. The family decided to install security cameras around their property, hoping to catch the perpetrators in the act. It was a small step, but it gave them a sliver of control in a situation that felt increasingly chaotic. The tension reached a fever pitch one evening when the cameras finally captured something. A group of hooded figures sneaking across their yard. The footage showed them spray painting hateful symbols and dumping bags of garbage on the lawn. Michael handed the footage to the police, his hope reignited. But days turned into weeks and no arrests were made. The perpetrators remained anonymous, their faces obscured by shadows. As the Johnsons tried to push forward, the weight of the harassment hung heavy over them. Clara's smile faded, her laughter replaced by long, silent stares. Michael threw himself into his work, using it as a distraction from the gnawing fear that they were losing the battle. But deep down, he knew the worst was yet to come. The Johnsons' nights were restless, their days tense. It seemed like every time they took a step toward reclaiming normalcy, the harassment escalated. But nothing could have prepared them for the cruel blow that came one morning in early fall. Michael was in the backyard repairing a broken fence when Emily's piercing scream ripped through the air. Dropping his tools, he sprinted toward the sound. Emily was crouched beside their family dog, Max, who lay unnaturally still on the grass. His once bright eyes were dim, his body trembling. Clara rushed outside, clutching James by the hand. "What happened?" Clara asked, her voice shaking. Michael knelt beside Max, running his hand over the dog's fur. It felt cold to the touch. Then he noticed something odd, a faint, acrid smell lingering around the dog's muzzle. His heart sank. Max had been poisoned. Emily sobbed uncontrollably, clutching Max's lifeless body. Why would someone hurt Max? He never did anything to anyone. Michael clenched his fists so tightly that his nails bit into his palms. He wanted to scream, to rage against whoever had done this. Instead, he wrapped his arms around his daughter, whispering words of comfort. He barely believed himself. The family buried Max in the backyard, their grief as heavy as the soil Michael shoveled over the small grave. That night, Clara sat at the dining table, staring blankly at the wall. "I want to leave, Michael. I can't take this anymore. First the shop, now Max. What's next?" "One of us?" Her words hit Michael like a freight train. He tried to be the pillar of strength, but even he was beginning to falter. Michael struggled to find an answer. The next attack came just days later. It was late in the evening, the children already in bed, when the sound of shattering glass echoed through the house. Michael and Clara raced to the living room, where they found a rock lying amidst a sea of broken glass. Attached to it was a crude note. "Next time, it'll be worse." Clara broke down, sobbing into Michael's chest. He held her tightly, his own fear and frustration threatening to boil over. But he couldn't let it show, not now. The family spent the night huddled together in the master bedroom, a makeshift fortress with furniture barricading the door. Michael barely slept, his ears tuned to every creak and whisper of the house. The following morning, Michael reviewed the security footage, desperate for a clue. What he found sent a shiver down his spine. The hooded figures were back, but this time they didn't just vandalize. They lingered, peering into the windows, their dark silhouettes a menacing presence against the pale glow of the porch light. Michael handed the footage to the police again, demanding action. But Officer Reynolds remained non-committal. "We're doing what we can," he said, his voice tinged with impatience. But without clear identification, Michael didn't let him finish. "So what? We just wait until someone gets hurt? Until my family is in pieces?" Reynolds had no answer. Would you keep trusting the system or take matters into your own hands? Determined not to back down, Michael began digging deeper. He combed through public records, trying to understand who in the neighborhood might have a motive. What he found was unsettling. Several neighbors had been part of a so-called neighborhood preservation committee that actively opposed diversity in the community. Michael's gut twisted. The hate they were experiencing wasn't random, it was calculated. But the true horror came when he discovered forged documents in the county records office. Someone had altered the deed to their home, claiming the Johnsons had obtained it illegally. It was a blatant lie, but it explained why so many neighbors had rallied against him. Michael shared his findings with Clara, but instead of relief, her face filled with dread. "You going to fight this, aren't you?" she asked. "I have to," he said. "This isn't just about us. It's about standing up to people who think they can bully families like ours into submission. But what if it gets worse?" Clara's voice cracked. "What if they hurt the kids?" Michael hesitated. He'd asked himself the same question countless times. But deep down, he knew they couldn't run. Not anymore. That night, another violent act shook the Johnson family. A Molotov cocktail was hurled through the front window, setting the living room curtains ablaze. Michael acted quickly, dousing the fire before it could spread, but the damage was done. The smell of burnt fabric lingered in the air, a cruel reminder of how far their tormentors were willing to go. When the police arrived, Clara was inconsolable. "They're trying to kill us," she cried. This time, Officer Reynolds seemed shaken. "I'll escalate this to the district attorney," he promised. "This is no longer just vandalism. It's attempted arson." But the Johnsons couldn't shake the feeling that they were alone in this fight. Michael spent the next day repairing the damage, his hands moving mechanically as his mind raced. Clara, meanwhile, began packing bags, her resolve to leave growing stronger. "I don't want to live like this, Michael," she said quietly. "No home is worth this much pain." Michael looked at her, his face weary but determined. "They want us gone, Clara. If we leave now, they win. But if we stay, if we fight, we can make sure this doesn't happen to another family." Clara didn't respond, but the doubt in her eyes spoke volumes. That night, as the family tried to sleep, the silence felt heavier than ever. Michael lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how much longer they could endure. But one thing was certain: the fight wasn't over. The morning air carried a crisp chill as Michael sat in his workshop, going through the county documents again. His coffee sat untouched, its warmth fading as he pored over the forged deeds and committee minutes he had uncovered. Something about the wording in one document gnawed at him, like a piece of a puzzle he couldn't quite fit. Clara entered quietly, her face pale from another sleepless night. "What are you looking for?" she asked, her voice tinged with exhaustion and defeat. "Proof," Michael replied, not looking up. "If we can connect these forged deeds to the people harassing us, we can take them to court." Clara sighed, sitting across from him. "And if you can't?" Michael met her gaze, his eyes shadowed with determination. "Then I'll find another way." "What would you do if justice felt just out of reach? Would you give up or dig deeper, no matter the cost?" Later that day, Michael received a tip from a sympathetic neighbor who had kept their distance but couldn't stay silent any longer. "Check the community meeting notes," the neighbor said, handing over a folder of old agendas. Michael combed through the pages, and there it was, a motion from the so-called Neighborhood Preservation Committee, proposing to discourage undesirable residents through nonviolent methods. The language was vague, but the intent was clear. Attached were signatures, familiar names from their street. His hands trembled as he flipped to the final page, where he saw something even more damning: a budget line item for a private security firm. It was the same firm Clara had seen patrolling the neighborhood shortly after they moved in. This wasn't just neighborhood gossip or individual spite. It was organized, deliberate persecution. Michael shared the findings with Clara that evening. She stared at the papers in silence, her face unreadable. Finally, she asked, "So what do we do now?" Michael took a deep breath. "We fight. We take this to a lawyer, to the media, anyone who'll listen." Clara hesitated. "Michael, this is bigger than we thought. What if they come after us harder? After the kids?" Michael placed his hand over hers. "They already have. But if we back down, we're letting them win not just against us, but against every family that comes after us. Would you risk everything for justice, even when the odds seemed insurmountable?" The next morning, Michael met with a civil rights attorney in the city. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Torres, listened intently as Michael laid out the evidence. "This is strong," she said, flipping through the documents. "But we'll need more. Witnesses, corroboration. Are you ready for the backlash this will bring?" Michael nodded. "I don't think it can get much worse." Rebecca gave him a knowing look. "It can. But if you're willing to stand your ground, I'll stand with you." The Johnsons' case began to take shape, but as Rebecca warned, the backlash was swift. Anonymous letters flooded their mailbox, threatening to expose fabricated scandals about Michael's business. Clara's sewing shop was vandalized again, this time with windows smashed beyond repair. And then came the whisper campaign rumors spreading through the community about why the Johnsons had really moved into the neighborhood. One night, Michael caught Clara sitting by Max's grave, her head bowed in silent prayer. "I don't know how much more I can take," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Michael knelt beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "We're going to get through this," he said. "I promise." But how do you hold on to hope when every step forward feels like a step deeper into danger? Then, a breakthrough came. One of the committee members, a middle-aged woman named Linda Carson, came forward. Racked with guilt, she agreed to testify that the harassment had been coordinated by the committee with the express purpose of driving the Johnsons out. "I didn't sign up for this," Linda admitted during a quiet meeting with Rebecca and Michael. "I thought it would be harmless, a way to keep the neighborhood traditional. But when they poisoned your dog, I can't stay silent anymore." Her testimony, combined with the documents Michael had uncovered, was enough to move forward. Rebecca filed a civil rights lawsuit on behalf of the Johnsons, alleging racial discrimination, harassment, and emotional distress. The news broke quickly, spreading beyond the small town. Reporters showed up on the Johnsons' doorstep, and while some neighbors quietly supported them, others doubled down on their hostility. One evening, as Michael addressed the cameras outside his home, he spoke directly to the perpetrators. "You tried to break us. You tried to make us afraid. But we're still here, and we're not going anywhere." The courtroom was hushed as Michael took the stand. His hands gripped the sides of the chair, knuckles white with tension. He looked across the room at the rows of neighbors, some glaring, others looking away in discomfort. Clara sat behind him, her hand resting on Emily's shoulder while James clung to her arm. Rebecca stood beside Michael, her voice firm and unwavering as she began questioning him. "Mr. Johnson, can you describe how your family's life has been affected since moving into this neighborhood?" Michael took a deep breath. "It's been a nightmare. We came here hoping for a fresh start, for a safe home where our kids could grow up. Instead, we faced constant harassment, vandalism, threats, and even violence. They killed our dog, poisoned him. They tried to burn down our home." His voice cracked, but he pressed on. "My kids don't feel safe. My wife doesn't feel safe. And no one should have to live like this." The room was heavy with silence, punctuated only by the faint scribbling of the court reporter's pen. Rebecca presented the evidence meticulously: the forged documents, the security footage, Linda Carson's testimony. Linda's voice trembled as she recounted the committee's actions, but her words landed like hammer blows. "We wanted to make them leave," she admitted. "We thought we were protecting the neighborhood, but it was wrong. It was hateful, and I'm sorry." The defendant's attorney tried to downplay the incidents, painting them as isolated acts carried out by rogue individuals. But Rebecca countered with damning precision. "This wasn't just a few bad apples," she declared, pacing before the jury. "This was a coordinated effort rooted in bigotry. The Johnson family was targeted because of the color of their skin. And if we allow this behavior to go unpunished, we're saying it's acceptable. It's not." As the trial stretched on, the Johnsons faced a barrage of emotions. Clara struggled to shield the children from the media storm, while Michael wrestled with doubts about whether they'd win. One evening, after another grueling day in court, Clara approached Michael as he sat on the porch. The night air was cool, and the stars above seemed indifferent to their plight. "You've been strong for all of us," she said, sitting beside him. "But it's okay to admit you're scared." Michael nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "I am scared. I'm scared of what happens if we lose. But I'm more scared of what happens if we don't try." Her hand found his, and they sat in silence, drawing strength from each other. The verdict, when the jury returned after days of deliberation, the courtroom was electric with anticipation. The foreperson stood, clearing her throat as she read the decision. "We find in favor of the plaintiffs, the Johnson family, and award damages for emotional distress and property loss." A wave of relief washed over Michael. Clara let out a soft cry, pulling Emily and James into a tight embrace. But it wasn't just about the money, it was about validation. The system had seen them, heard them, and ruled in their favor. As they left the courthouse, reporters swarmed them with questions. Michael raised his hand, quieting the crowd. "This isn't just a win for my family," he said, his voice steady. "It's a message to every family facing discrimination. You have the right to fight back. And when you do, you're not just standing up for yourself, you're standing up for justice. The backlash didn't end immediately. Some neighbors continued to shun them, while others offered quiet apologies. But as the story spread, the Johnsons received letters and calls from families across the country, some sharing similar experiences, others offering support and solidarity. The Johnsons had won the battle, but they knew the war against injustice wasn't over. Together, they began to rebuild, not just their home, but their sense of security and hope. The Johnsons' journey was a testament to resilience in the face of relentless adversity. Sitting on their porch months after the trial, Michael watched as Emily and James played in the yard. Their laughter was lighter now, free from the weight of fear. Clara sat beside him, her sewing machine humming softly in the background, a sound that had become a symbol of their return to normalcy. But the scars of their experience remained. The vandalism, the threats, the loss of Max, those wounds would never fully heal. It's not about forgetting, Michael often said. It's about remembering why we stood our ground. The family's story became a rallying cry for change. Media coverage of their case sparked conversations about racial prejudice in small towns across the country. Community groups formed, advocating for inclusivity and stronger protections against hate crimes. To Michael and Clara, their victory was about more than a legal win. It was about proving that no family should be driven out of their home because of the color of their skin. It was about standing firm in the belief that justice, though slow and arduous, was worth the fight. What about you? Would you have found the strength to endure? Could you have faced down fear and hatred, knowing that your stand might inspire others to do the same? Their story serves as a reminder. Injustice thrives in silence, but courage can ignite change. The Johnson story isn't just theirs, it's ours. It's a reflection of the struggles many families face when prejudice rears its head. But it's also a story of hope, resilience, and the belief that justice can prevail. As you hear their journey, ask yourself, what would you do if it were your family? Would you stand tall even when the world tries to knock you down? Let the Johnsons' courage remind us that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable world. Share their story, not just to raise awareness, but to inspire action, because change begins with us. Thank you for listening.